Wood Johnson is charged with stealing, on November 17, a pair of gilded harness worth about 15 soldi belonging to Mr. Raoul Hendler. Do you deny the guilt, Mr. Johnson?
I am innocent, sir.
Hearing the familiar words spoken by the clerk and the defendant, Burton Chester turned his attention to the young man sitting on the left side of his row. It was a handsome young man with a white fake collar, a black open-fronted loose-sleeved robe with shoulder pads, and a short white wig made of horsehair. Sitting and looking at the judge on the bench, he is the defense lawyer of the defendant Rolls Adrian. For this young man who was dressed the same as himself, Burton Chester knew him well, or in other words, no one among the judicial practitioners in Backlund did not know him. Rawls came from a family of lawyers. His father, Mason Adrian, was born in poverty but was not satisfied with the status quo. He worked as a worker in the dock area during the day and studied in the free night school established by the goddess of the night at night. He entered the law school and became a barrister. In just a few years, he became famous in Backlund's legal profession. At the age of 35, he even founded a law firm. Perhaps it was due to overwork in the early years that Mason had not lived past the age of 60 and died of illness the year before. Rolls Adrian, who was still studying at Lincoln Law School in Tingen at the time, returned to Backlund to deal with Mason's funeral and took over his own law firm. Of course, if that was the case, Burton would never know Rawls so clearly. He was just a young man who inherited his own law firm. Backlund has young people who inherit a large amount of property every year, and every year they squander their property, and then go to the dock area to wander, go to young workers as workers. Burton saw a lot when he was a lawyer when he was young, and even drafted lots of sales contracts. But Rolls Adrian is different. After his father passed away, he completed his 5 years of studies in just 6 months. Graduated from Lincoln Law School and became a barrister. And then, like his father Mason, he became famous faster than his father. It only took him a year to become a famous barrister in Backlund. Although in the past half-month, for some reason, Rawls began to contact ordinary civil cases, and even such small cases involving less than £1 began to take over. Glancing at Rawls again, Burton sighed uncontrollably, too young. I heard that Rawls is not yet 22 years old this year, and he was still studying at law school when he was 22. And Rawls himself looked at the judge on the bench, Harvey Brooke. He was about 50 years old, with many wrinkles on his white face, wearing a black silk casual robe, with a short white wig. He was drink with a glass. Although he knew from the memory of his predecessor that many judges who believed in the Lord of the Storm used to drink a glass of Lonky wine during court sessions, but neither the predecessor nor himself had seen it. Perhaps it was because of a small civil case to be tried, and the sum involved was only 15 soles, so Judge Brooke could drink a glass of Longzhi. The predecessor dealt with some major civil and criminal cases, so no judge dared to drink a glass of Lonky before the trial, but Lai Lonky. However, looking at the quilled pen holder, silver candlesticks and already tilted scales scattered on the bench of Judge Brooke, Rawls felt that His Excellency the Judge may not be afraid to drink a drink during the trial of a major case, but so in his old age, he was only a salaried magistrate of the Chawood District Magistrates' Court, and he was afraid that he would not have the opportunity to hear major cases. After all, this is the capital of the Lone Kingdom, the capital of all capitals. The House of Lords, the Court of Appeal, the High Court, and the Royal Court are all here. Where can I get a paid magistrate from a magistrate's court? A biography of Raoul Hendler. When he heard the clerk begin to summon the client Raoul Hendler, Rawls knew that the trial had begun, and Judge Brooke put down his glass, tidied up his black casual robe, and looked at Raoul Hendler, the client. L.E. Raoul Hendler was about 50 years old, wearing a white shirt and a red waistcoat, trying to restrain his bulging belly, his face warm. Mr. Johnson came to my house last November and became my coachman, but last November he begged me to go back to Whitecliff. His son was ill. Hendler told the jury. Arms, as a gentleman, of course I agreed. After paying Mr. Johnson's wages, I went on holiday to Dixie Bay, only to return in February this year. When I came back, I found that one of my gilded harnesses was missing. My servant told me it was taken by Mr. Johnson when he left. Handler pointed to Wood Johnson, who was standing in the dock. I knew that Mr. Johnson's son was ill, and he might have stolen my gilded harness and sold it for his son's treatment, so I immediately called a servant. Go and ask. The servant told me that when I went to Handler's house, I happened to find my harness. So I wrote to Mr. Johnson and asked him to return the harness to me. But Mr. Johnson didn't want to return it to me, so I had to sue him. Handler's words caused the jury to whisper, and Harvey Brooke on the bench struck the hammer. Rolls Adrian. Rawls stood up from the bar, nodded to Judge Brooke, and looked at Raoul Handler on the right of the plaintiff. Mr. Handler, how did you find out that your harness was missing? Did you find it was missing when you were using it? No, I found it out during an inventory of my property. After all, you must know that I left Backlund to go to Dixie Bay for a vacation for more than a month, and some servants who always use a black heart will secretly take the master when he is not at home. Things. When Handler said of the servant with a black heart, he looked at Wood Johnson, who was standing opposite. This is what every gentleman hates, so I have to ask before and after every vacation. Take an inventory of my possessions. That's right, this kind of thing happens all the time in my family. It seems that I have to learn from Mr. Handler. A young man in a black tuxedo shouted in the jury. Tuck tuck, Mr. Charles, don't you want to be invited out? Judge Brooke sounded the hammer and warned. Young Charles sat down angrily. Rawls turned around and gave a quiet gesture to Wood Johnson, who was anxious to defend himself. Oh! Rawls let out a chuckle, then you have 2 carriages. No, only a 12-wheeled carriage. That doesn't suit your status. You should buy another 4-wheeled sedan. In Backlund, wealthy gentlemen often have 2 carriages, one with 2 wheels and one with 4-wheeled sedan. I haven't gotten to this point yet, Lawyer Rawls. Although Handler didn't know what Rawls wanted to express, he still replied. Although Rawls is currently his enemy, he is very willing to befriend such a promising young barrister, especially if his current situation is not very good. But I heard that you bought a lot of land the year before last, and last year you had an income of nearly £3,000. But I heard that you bought a lot of land the year before last, and last year you had an income of nearly £3,000. You must know that the annual income of a barrister in Backlund is only about £1,000. Raoul Handler's lawyer, Burton Chester, realized what was wrong and stood up and said, Your Excellency, I protest. Lawyer's question has nothing to do with this case. Harvey Brooke nodded, motioned Burton Chester to sit down, and said, Mr. Adrian, pay attention to your statement related to the case. Rawls put his hand on his chest and bowed slightly to Judge Brooke. I'm sorry, Your Excellency, I will pay attention. As if not seeing Handler's instantly livid face, Rawls began to ask Wood Johnson, Mr. Johnson, I heard that jobs like housekeepers, servants, and coachmen are different from dock workers, and they are not paid on a weekly basis. But according to the annual salary. Yes, Mr. Attorney. Wood rubbed his hands cramped on his sagging breeches. Know that people like us can ruin the whole family at any time because of an accident. And when the coachman can eat and live with the master, the salary will be better. However, although we are paid annually, the master will usually pay on a weekly basis, and at most will be in arrears for some time. General case a case. Did Mr. Handler pay according to that? No, it's pay after a year of work. Johnson waved his hand quickly. My God! My goddess, how dare he do this? No way! His words caused the jury to exclaim. Although the conditions for entering the jury are very low, the members of the jury are often rich and wealthy families. Only they will choose to become a member of the jury to pass the time because of lack of entertainment. But because of this, they knew very well how to pay their servants, and knew exactly what the servants' lives would be like if they delayed paying their servants' salaries. Everyone present turned their attention to Raoul Handler. Handler's livid face immediately turned red, and he said excitedly, "The annual salary I give him is £27. It is £2 more than the salary of a normal coachman." "But my client didn't agree, did he?" Rawls pressed step by step. Handler waved his arm vigorously and said, "But after I promised to give him some other things as a reward, he still agreed." All eyes turned to Wood Johnson again. "Is that so, Mr. Johnson?" "Yes. I'd like to build up some extra money to get my son Johnson Jr. to go to a grammar school so he doesn't have to live with people like us. My wife's salary plus Jr. Johnson's temporary worker, barely making ends meet. After a year, £27, enough to send my little Johnson to grammar school. Who knew that a year of work made little Johnson seriously ill, so I had to quit my job and return to Whitecliff." As he spoke, Mr. Johnson choked up, and some emotional ladies on the jury were left with tears of sympathy. Rawls did not continue to question Wood Johnson, but just handed him a handkerchief, and then turned to question Handler. "Mr. Handler, when did my client, Wood Johnson, start working as a coachman in your house?" Raoul Handler realized that something was wrong, frowned, and said, "I said it just now, in November of the previous year." "Please tell me the exact date, it's very important." "November 7th, I remember very clearly. The day before, little Johnson said that his teacher had made him a tutor in the class." Johnson wiped his tears with a handkerchief, and the corners of his eyes were red. Free schools are night schools established by the three major churches or some charitable organizations. Classes are held from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the evening, and there is no charge at all. Writing tools and certain papers are even provided for free. It belongs to the education of literacy. Of course, because there are very few people who volunteer to be teachers in free schools, a unique teaching model has been formed there, that is, the teacher arrives early, and the students with the best learning progress are called first, and they will talk about today. The content is instilled into them, and then they are responsible for the teaching of different classes, while the teacher patrols back and forth to correct errors, which is called the guiding system. Corresponding to free schools, there are also free organizations such as workshops for skilled workers, which are the few channels that the real poor can access and can get rid of their own class. It is a pity that there are too few similar organizations, and it is difficult to play a substantive role. Rawls continued to ask Handler, "When did you leave?" "On November 13 last year, a friend from the town came to me that day and said that little Johnson was seriously ill." Johnson hurriedly replied, and then he painted his face with tears. Seeing Handler nodding reluctantly, Rawls said, "In other words, my client, Wood Johnson, has worked at Mr. Handler's house for a year and should pay Mr. Johnson £27. Rawls paused and said loudly, "And other things." Rawls walked up to Handler and stared into his eyes. "I would like to ask Mr. Handler, so these other packages do not include a pair of gilded harnesses worth close to £1 gold?" Lawyer Burton had already closed his eyes. He realized that he had lost, when Rawls mentioned that Handler had bought a lot of land. Although he was interrupted in time at that time, the young Rawls lawyer was so hard at inciting emotions that the jury didn't care. Even his employer seemed like a curly-haired baboon. You read www.uuganchu.com has no brains, he clearly told him before the trial, but he was easily told the truth by Rawls. "I won't give my harness to anyone. That's me. Mr. Handler." Rawls interrupted Handler. "What is that?" "It can pay for it and satisfy the coachman, Mr. Handler." "Mr. Handler, you have to use your brains. Let's see what else can meet the conditions." Rawls' index finger slowly circled around his head. "A&D. A&D." Handler thought hard. "But I think there should be none. After all, is there anything in your family that hasn't been sold to pay off the debt? Thanks to the establishment of the Corn Act, the price of land has been very popular in recent years. Hendler tasted the sweetness last year because of the land he bought the year before. He not only used all the income from last year to buy the land, but also took out a huge loan. And half a month ago, it was reported that the Grain Act was going to be repealed, and a week ago, the House of Commons formally proposed the relevant bill. Hendler's creditors came to collect debts, and Hendler was only able to pay off his debts when he sold all his land and valuables. After finishing speaking, Rawls turned back to his seat and bowed slightly to Judge Harvey Brooke. "Mr. Judge, I have no problem." "Mr. Burton Chester, it's your turn." Hearing the secretary's words, Chester opened his eyes and stood up. There was nothing he could do, whether it was the attitude of the jury or the judge. It could be heard from the voice of the clerk. Chester looked at Rolls Adrian again, found that he had already lowered his head and sorted out the case collection, and sighed again inwardly, "Too young." "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, discuss your verdict." Judge Harvey Brooke leaned back in his chair and raised his glass again. After a brief discussion among the jury members, a young man in a black woolen coat stood up from his seat, looked around, and shouted, "Not guilty." Outside the magistrate's court on West Villas Street, Wood Johnson, who was wearing a thick brown jacket on his upper body and sagging bloomer breeches on his lower body, rubbed his right hand on the breeches with gratitude, and then stretched out, saying, "Thank you, Mr. Adrian, I really don't know how to thank you." Rawls stretched out his hand, shook his hand, and replied with a smile, "This is what I should do, and you've paid for it, haven't you?" No, I know that for a big man like you, the 10 souls are far from enough. It's only because you are soft-hearted and kind that you accepted the commission of my lawyer. I thought that the money could only come from my lawyer. To defend me in court, I never thought I could hire a barrister, a top barrister like you. In the Lone Kingdom, lawyers are divided into barristers and solicitors. The latter is responsible for matters that do not need to go to court, such as collecting evidence, talking with clients, helping people draw up wills, supervising property distribution and providing legal counseling services. Of course, they can also represent their clients in the most elementary magistrates' courts to defend simple cases. The barrister is the lawyer who studies the evidence and defends the client in court. According to the laws of the Ruined Kingdom, they must maintain an objective attitude, so they cannot directly contact the client. Everyone is a real legal expert, with outstanding eloquence and a high level of debate. Since the two types of lawyers have their own division of labor, the litigation costs of the parties will inevitably increase. In general cases, the parties must hire 2 lawyers at the same time. If the case involves royal interests or the case is particularly complicated, another royal barrister must be hired, so that the parties may have to bear the costs of 3 lawyers at the same time. However, a junior solicitor can defend a case like Wood Johnson that involves an amount not exceeding £1. However, due to the different division of labor between the two types of lawyers, the lawyer's defense in court is somewhat uneven. Once Johnson loses, asking for the return of the gilded harness and compensation is only the most basic requirement. The judge's sentence ranges from branding or whipping, to exile in the southern continent or an island, even decades ago. Sentenced to hang. Rawls clearly remembers the relevant sentences he read, the most serious being a 13-year-old boy named Andrew Browning who was hanged for stealing a spoon. Hillston District, 47, Wutong Road. Adrian Law Firm. Rawls had already changed into a purple dressing gown with gold trimmings. Although the lawyer's robe was wide, the hard-turned fake collar made him very uncomfortable for the past 2 weeks. Leaning on the sofa, Rawls gently moved his neck and looked at the young man who was helping him sort out the precedents. "Locke, tell me what you think about Mr. Johnson's case today." "Mr. Johnson is really pitiful. He just wants his son to go to grammar school, but..." "Mr. Grant." Rawls stopped moving his neck and looked at the young man in front of him. "Which law school did you graduate from?" Wearing a double-breasted woolen coat, the young man with blonde hair froze in place, staring blankly at Rawls. It's the Middle Temple lawyer." Rawls interrupted Grant again, Please tell me the difference between a barrister and a solicitor. Although he was overwhelmed by Rawles's sudden tantrum, Locke Grant knew that as a trainee lawyer, he had to fully accept the difficulties he had instructing lawyers, otherwise it would be difficult to continue his career as a lawyer. What's more, Rawles is not only his own guiding lawyer, but also his own boss. Barristers are mainly responsible for defense. Yes. Defense. Remember, our job is only defense, nothing else. You don't need to care whether the client is poor or rich, righteous or evil. Rawls simply wanted the villain to do it to the end, and did not intend to let Locke at all finish talking. Locke has froze. In his mind, Rawls, as the owner of a law firm, defends many poor people who can't afford legal fees for almost free. He is definitely a kind and sympathetic person. But now Rawls told him that he didn't care whether the customer was poor, or even whether the customer was good or evil. Rawls looked at the stunned Locke and slowed down. This is not to teach you to be a lawyer without rules, but this is the most basic principle of being a good barrister. How is that possible? Locke Grant was completely confused. He didn't understand what Rawls was saying. How do you think you can become a good barrister? Familiar with the law, excellent eloquence. Locke tried hard to turn his brain, but when he heard what Rawls just said, it was as if someone had been hit with a sap. Calm brain is still stumbled. Familiarity with the law can make you a legal expert, and excellent eloquence can make you an orator. But these are only prerequisites for becoming a barrister. Premise. Yes, the premise. To become a good barrister, the ability to find loopholes is essential. Whether it is a loophole in the law, a loophole in the opponent's language, or more importantly, a loophole in the mind. Rawls stood up and poked his heart with his index finger. Locke touched his heart and murmured, "A loophole in the mind." The work of barristers and solicitors is different. This is because of Rowan's tradition. Although many legal people support the merger of the two, I don't think so. Once the barrister and the client get too close, they know too much. If you go too deep, it's easy to be emotional, and your opponent will find the loopholes in your heart. Losing and winning is a matter of an instant. Looking at Locke, who was still a little confused, Rawls frowned and said, "How did I win this defense?" "You are, sorry sir." Locke felt like a curly-haired baboon. "I first got the jury to sympathize with Mr. Johnson, then I used the pressure of the jury to get Hendler to say the deal with Mr. Johnson, and finally I mentioned the huge amount Hendler owed because of the repeal of the Corn Act. The debt left him completely speechless. That's how Hendler lost the case when I caught the loophole in his mind." Rawls patted Locke on the shoulder, "Go back to rest first." "I plan to rest for a week. During this time, you can look at my previous case collection, and then go to the police or the criminal court to observe a few sessions." The third floor of Adrian Law Firm, Rawls' office. Rawls was lying on his side on the couch, with one foot on one arm of the sofa. The scenes in the courtroom kept flashing back and forth in his mind. Regardless of how he looked like he was holding a shiju to Locke Grant, Rawls knew in his heart that he almost rolled over today. If he hadn't already become a Sequence 9 lawyer, today's case would definitely be lost. He originally wanted to let Raoul Hendler lose control of his emotions through words, just as he just said to Locke, as long as his emotions are out of control, he will be used by lawyers who are good at grasping loopholes, so this case will be the same as the case handled in the previous half-month, and win quickly. It is a pity that Rawls had just made some progress in guiding Hendler's emotions, and he only needed a few more words to achieve his purpose, and was interrupted by Burton Chester, making him unable to without transferring the object of questioning. He began to question his client, Wood Johnson. Neither his predecessor nor himself likes to ask his clients. After all, some clients are curly-haired baboons. As long as they say a wrong sentence in court, Rawls himself will be passive. Moreover, due to the legal regulations of the Lone Kingdom, Rawls, as a barrister, must maintain an objective attitude. He can only collect information through a solicitor, and cannot directly contact the client. Even if there is contact, they should be accompanied by a solicitor and communicate with the client for a few minutes before the hearing. This is not enough time for Rawls to communicate with his client, so he always wins by emotional guidance for the other client, and his predecessor is praised by many people for this. But today Rawls had to ask his client, and it was fortunate that Mr. Johnson was cunning enough. He knew very well that Johnson's honest and kind-hearted appearance in court, bullied by a bad master, was not his real face, but a disguise. The lawyer potion not only gave him extraordinary abilities in eloquence and persuasion, but also distorted or guided the target's thinking to a certain extent, making people feel friendly and willing to believe, and also gave him extraordinary insight. Although it is not as magical as the audience, it can gain insight into people's real thoughts, but it is enough to perceive some emotional fluctuations of the target and judge whether the target is lying from the expression. The people on the jury are not very good themselves, they are just a bunch of guys who have nothing to do with money and no brains. In addition, Wood Johnson's acting skills are good, so they can easily deceive the jury, but they can't deceive him after taking the potion. But the reason for the near rollover today was that Burton Chester interrupted his emotional guidance. According to my observation, Burton Chester should be just an ordinary person. As for why he can just interrupt my guidance, it should only be based on years of experience as a barrister. The profession of lawyers has always required a lot of experience. Hi. Attorney Burton has been a barrister for over 20 years, and it would be reasonable to have that experience. This is not because Rawls is too suspicious, but because the world is too crazy. As a traverser, Rawls must learn from the protagonist K, who has not yet arrived, and must not act recklessly. Yes, crossing again, in this day and age, crossing is already a very common thing. Rawls, who has read many time travel novels, quickly accepted the reality after the time travel. After all, in the previous life, one person had enough to eat and the whole family was not hungry. After traveling to another world, he might be able to reach the peak of his life. But after Rawls gradually integrated his predecessor's memory and initially understood the details of the crossing world, he immediately regretted it, and he entered the world of Lord of Mysteries. The Lord of Mysteries is the best work of the Squid Girl, and Rawls has naturally read it, and once imagined that he could take magical medicine, as long as it is not witch, abyss, and the horror path of the devil medicine, even the mother and moon paths can accept it. After all, Rawls doesn't want to go too far. He still knows the reason that the stronger it is, the crazier it is. But no matter what, Rawls never thought of crossing into this world. In other worlds, traversers, especially those who know the plot, are extremely lucky, which means that the secrets of the whole world are like naked girls. Let you ravage. But in this world, knowledge is poisonous. The more secret knowledge it contains, the more dangerous it is. The more you know, the faster you die. To this day, Rawls still has lingering fears. After learning about the world he is in, the secrets and conspiracies that flashed in his mind are enough to make him headshot or deform into a monster. However, after a few days of worrying about Rawls, he found that nothing happened to him, and he knew that there should be something in him that could block his inner secrets. Reading www.yuyugonshu.com. But after half a month of time travel, Rawls still didn't find any special existence in him, so he didn't even think about it. He is now completely barefoot and not afraid of wearing shoes, so he can do whatever he likes. In the past 2 weeks, although there was no progress in this matter, he also found out the secret of his body's predecessor. Rawls Adrian, 23 years old this year, graduated from Lincoln Law School in Tingen. His father, Mason Adrian, died of a heart attack 2 years ago, leaving his predecessor a rich inheritance, including £7,000. The above deposits, 3 sets of Backlund real estate, 1 set of Tingen real estate, 1 holiday villa in Dixie Bay, and Mason's lifelong efforts Adrian Law Firm. The predecessor also worked very hard. First, he graduated from the law school with honors 5 years earlier, and then quickly became a barrister. He won many lawsuits, made the firm famous. But these are just the things on the face of the predecessor, otherwise Rawls can happily take over the legacy left by the predecessor. It was because of the troubles left behind by his predecessor that Rawls had to continue to be a lawyer. The predecessor was not an ordinary person, but an extraordinary who took the sequence 9 lawyer potion. This is also why the predecessor was able to graduate from the law school 5 years in advance, while the average person needs to study in the law school for 7 years to successfully graduate, and also be a trainee lawyer for 1 year. I got a tool person, and through Mason's relationship, and donated a large amount of money to the Law Society, it was successfully skipped. These are not very troublesome, the trouble is the source of the potion. This potion comes from Viscount Dread Bird Mustang, who is the second mate of Nast Solomon, the owner of the King of the Five Seas and Dark Emperor. When Rawls knew that his predecessor had become Bird Mustang's intelligence spy in Backlund because of a Sequence 9 potion, his heart collapsed. The reason why the predecessor was able to obtain the potion from Bird Mustang was because Mason was Bird Mustang's intelligence spy in Backlund, and he also took the lawyer potion, so he changed from a worker to a famous one. The barrister has created a huge family business. The day after the predecessor returned to Backlund from Tingen to handle Mason's funeral, Bird Mustang came to the door and told the predecessor about Mason's identity. In order not to break up Mason's painstaking law firm, the predecessor also chose to become a lawyer because Viscount Dread Bird Mustang, a great pirate with a bounty of more than £10,000, was by his side. Mustang's intelligence spy in Backlund. However, Bird Mustang left in a hurry after teaching his predecessor some esoteric knowledge and the way of passing information, and he didn't even leave any specific tasks behind. Until a year ago, Bird Marstein, Viscount Dread, gave his predecessor a task to inquire about the ironclad ships that the Lone Kingdom was secretly manufacturing. But the predecessor had achieved nothing for a year, and Mustang did not urge anything, as if he had forgotten to assign a task to the predecessor. A month ago, the predecessor got out of control, and then Rawls crossed. After sorting out all this, Rawls had a lot of doubts. The first is the loss of control of the predecessor. There is no sign and no reason, the predecessor is not a wild beyonder, under the guidance of Bird Mustang, he knows the acting method. Although I have been busy dealing with the affairs of the law firm, I have always kept in mind the true meaning of the acting law, and it is impossible to suddenly lose control, which is illogical. Secondly, about Bird Mustang, this Viscount of Fear really doesn't fit his identity. Although he is the second mate of Nast, the King of the Five Seas, he needs to abide by the virtue of not killing prisoners required by Nast, a descendant of the Solomon Empire, but after all, he is a pirate, or a big pirate with a bounty of over 10,000. He was too gentle with his predecessor. As an intelligence spy, he not only did not give specific tasks, but also carefully taught him, and even told him about the acting method. Rawls is not a predecessor, and he knows nothing about the Beyonder Circle. He knows how important acting is. Not to mention pirates, even the low-level Beyonders of the 7 major churches seldom know about it. And Bird Mustang told him, and as a big pirate with a bounty higher than Kylingus, the chaotic mentor of Sequence 5, he stayed in Backlund for a week to teach the predecessor's mysticism. Knowledge. If you want the predecessor to better inquire about the news about the ironclad ship, but there is no urgency at all, not even a message. Rawls guessed that either Bird Mustang and Mason had an unfortunate relationship, or he had other plans, and because of this, Rawls did not think that the loss of control of the predecessor was related to Bird Mustang. After all, no matter what. Whatever the reason, he didn't need to do it. In the end, Rawls knew too many secrets that he shouldn't know, but he has been safe and sound. This is unreasonable. However, Rawls guessed that this may be related to the loss of control of his predecessor. He believed that there must be a high-ranking power in him to help him cover, but even if Rawls risked his life to recall the original work, he could not find relevant clues. With a long sigh, Rawls sat up from the sofa. Now he can only wait for Klein, who is hanging on Sesame Castle, and Zhou Minggrui should be released now. Today is April 26th, there are still 2 months, no, it will take a while, at least until Klein becomes a diver and has the energy to pull the 3rd and 4th members over the Origin Castle ability. There are still 2 to 3 months, just take this time to digest the potion, and then see if it can be promoted to Sequence 8 Barbarian. As for the recipe, he still remembers that most Beyonders of the pathway can effectively enhance memory, and the lawyer potion is also the best. The main materials of Barbarian, a wild flower grass and a solid horn crystal of a rhinoceros. As for the auxiliary materials are a deep-grained walnut, a lemon balm, 10 ml of hydrosol soaked in poplar bark, spirits 100 ml. For Rawls, it is not difficult to digest the lawyer potion, and his predecessor has done most of it for him. The rebuke and instruction of the trainee lawyer Locke Grant who followed him just now was the way the predecessor sought to digest the potion, and to summarize his lawyer code of conduct by instructing the trainee lawyer. In the past 2 weeks, he has also used this method to summarize the lawyer's code of conduct. It only takes an opportunity to completely digest it. In the past 2 weeks, in order to become familiar with his own abilities, and he could not rely on other people's life and death on his own attempts, he only accepted a few small cases, but through today's lawsuit, he clearly recognized the power of Beyonders. Reading www.yuyugonshu.com and then you can get in touch with some big cases. However, it is not easy for Rawls to collect the main materials of Barbarian. The only Beyonder known to his predecessor was Bird Mustang, and Ken Lister, who was in charge of contacting him, was just an ordinary person. There's a bar in the quayside. There are many Beyonder circles in Backlund that Rawls knows, but they all need an introduction, so there are probably not many who can join. One is Mr. A's circle that Furswall brought Audrey Hall into, but this involves the lunatic group of the Aurora Society, and he is still not sure where Furs is. If he wants to find it, he must first get it from Hugh Dilcha. This is very easy, she has a great reputation among the working class and gangster organizations in the Eastern District of Backlund. Another extraordinary circle is Detective Isengard Stanton's Extraordinary Party in Iron Gate Street, Bridge District, near the Brave Bar. There is a woman who needs a barbarian formula, and it should be possible to exchange the formula for potions. Yes, and there should be a craftsman behind her, just enough to buy some extraordinary items. In addition to finding the circle of Beyonders, he also needs to start physical exercise and practice fighting skills. Neither his predecessor nor Rawls have any experience in this area, and he will definitely experience these in the future. People prepare. Mystery knowledge has to be picked up again. It is always right to learn more. The esoteric materials left by Viscount Fear should still be in the secret room. If he turned around and looked through it, he might find his secrets. He was convinced that his secrets should be related to the lawyer sequence. Thinking of this, Rawls realized that he might not have a good time in the future, so he wailed again, fell back on the sofa, and lay up again. Boom! 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 There was a rhythmic knock on the door, and Rawls got up from the sofa. He was no longer as lazy as he was just now. He had already heard who the visitor was from the knock on the door. "Please come in." Click. After the door was opened, an old man walked in. He was of medium build, and his hairline receded quite severely like most men in Lwen, but he was quite neatly combed, and he was wearing a straight black tuxedo. He frowned slightly, and his grey-blue eyes stared at Rawls, who was dressed in a dressing gown, and sighed lightly. "Rawls, I have said many times, don't wear a dressing gown in the office. If there are guests visiting, to see you dressed like this will think that the Adrian family lacks etiquette." Rawls shrugged his shoulders and said with a smile, "Meeting in a dressing gown will make my guests feel that our relationship is close, which is more conducive to further development, isn't it? Uncle Robert." The dressing gown is an intice-inspired home attire that men can wear to stay at home, or as an intimate expression to entertain guests at receptions or dinner parties. But in the conservative Rouen style, only a few young men wear it like this. They are tired of stiff and tight three-piece suits and choose to meet guests in their dressing gowns at home or in the office. This aroused the disgust of many old gentlemen of Rouen, not to mention that this Edmund Robert was the etiquette teacher of Rawls and his father Mason Adrian. Edmund Robert, 59 years old this year, is the youngest son of a baron, so he did not inherit the title. After his father's death, he didn't share much property, and he didn't have a good relationship with his brother who inherited the title, so Edmund, who had a good etiquette upbringing, chose to become an etiquette teacher in order to live, specializing in teaching those who had just entered the upper class. The rich but lack of etiquette training. Edmund's etiquette teaching career didn't come to an end until he met Mason. Mason had been famous in Backlund for many years at that time, but he had not joined any law firm, and he also had considerable savings, so he chose to open a law firm of his own. But Mason, who has always been a running single gang, had no idea how to open a law firm. After discussing the matter with Edmund, who was teaching Mason etiquette at the time, Edmund volunteered and helped Mason to open up today's Adrian Lawyers Together office. At the beginning of its establishment, Mason was only responsible for the reputation of the firm, and Edmund was responsible for the daily work of the firm. The cooperation of the two made Adrian Law Firm a well-known law firm in Backlund. If it wasn't for Edmund's belief in the Lord of the Storm and Mason's belief in the Evernight Goddess, then with the friendship between the two, Edmund would definitely become the godfather of his predecessor. Although Edmund did not become the predecessor's godfather, the relationship between the two was very close, not only because the predecessor had followed Edmund to learn etiquette since childhood, but also because the father-son relationship between the predecessor and Mason was not good, otherwise they would not have run to the Tinge and went to school. After Mason's death, if Edmund hadn't helped his predecessor to stabilize people's hearts, even if his predecessor became a lawyer, it would not have been so easy to take over the firm. After all, those big lawyers would not be mistreated in any firm. In order to inspire his predecessor, Edmund began to play the role of Mason's strict father, and to Rawls was the Adrian family at every turn, as if the Adrian family were some hereditary nobles. Edmund closed the door, took a few steps forward, pointed out the window and said, "You have to remember, Rawls. This is Lone, and you are a barrister, and it is Lone who communicates with you. They don't think you are showing intimacy to them by dressing like this, they will only think that you don't respect them, and the honor of the Adrian family will be tarnished. Precisely because my guests are all from families with etiquette education, someone will naturally inform me before they come to visit. At that time, I will definitely make all preparations to welcome my distinguished guests." Rawls pointed to Changsha. Facing a wooden door across from him, that was his locker room and lounge. "Rawls." Edmund looked serious and paused for the cane made of walnut in his hand. "Your father never used sophistry in non-court areas after he learned etiquette." Rawls took a few steps back like a conditioned reflex. Mason also had the same cane, but the previous impression was not friendly at all. "Sorry, Uncle Robert." Rawls was very helpless. Ever since he knew Mason's true identity, he had always suspected that Mason's study of etiquette was just for better intelligence, but he couldn't directly tell Edmund that Mason had bad intentions. Edmund's expression softened slightly. He sat on the single sofa in the second seat, leaned his cane against the wall, and said, "Are you still going to take over those small cases?" He has always been very dissatisfied with Rawls taking over those small cases. It is not that he is dissatisfied with the small amount of money he can earn. Rawls is not short of money, but thinks that these are good for the Adrian family. It's useless. It's better to participate in some charitable activities if you have these time, and you can earn more fame. No, although these cases are not big, there is too little valid evidence and they are all troublesome, so I plan to rest for a while." Rawls waved his hand. These cases really made him feel tired, especially today only together, almost overturned.
Well, that's fine too.
Edmund nodded. Because of your actions during this period, some of the barristers in the firm are very dissatisfied.
Rawls frowned and asked, is it troublesome?
Who are they? He really didn't think about it so much at the beginning, he just wanted to try the ability of a lawyer, and he didn't care about how much he could get paid. It seems that he disturbed the market price and let the barrister of his law firm have something to do with it.
Dissatisfied?
Humph. With me here, it's not their turn to point fingers at the office. The voice was full of confidence. After all, he and Mason founded the office together, and Edmund was in charge of the daily work of the office. More to go.
Uncle, I have an idea, can you take a look at it?
Rawls walked to the desk, dug out a piece of paper from the notebook, and handed it to Edmund. This is his way back. If he really has no talent as a lawyer, he plans to retire, become a manager with peace of mind, and use time to dilute the effect of the potion on him, as long as he doesn't get out of control. Edmund took out his handheld single-handled glasses from his arms. The lenses were made of crystal, the frame and single handle were made of silver, and the single handle with intricate patterns was inlaid with an emerald. He's getting older and his eyes are starting to fade, but he doesn't like the kind of framed eyes that he wears all the time, which can make a mark on the bridge of his nose. Attorney partner. Edmund continued to look down in surprise. The partnership system is actually reflected in all walks of life in loan. For example, several people partnered to open a company, bought a boat together to go fishing, etc. Even strictly speaking, those kings of pirates, pirate generals, and their subordinates pirates are partners. The Adrian law firm founded by Edmund and Mason is also a manifestation of the partnership system, but Edmund is not just a lawyer, he is only responsible for daily work. The lawyer partner proposed by Rawls is actually to distribute a part of the firm's shares to some of the better lawyers in the firm, so that they can earn money from the firm in addition to their own fixed salary and case draw. If you get a part of it, you can earn dozens or hundreds of pounds more in 1 year. Additional income is second, mainly to firmly bind these people and firms. It's a really good idea. Edmund put away his single-lens glasses and rubbed his eyebrows, but it's not necessary now. Isn't it necessary? Rawls was a little surprised. He originally thought Edmund would accept it. After all, this was the only thing he remembered about the legal profession in his previous life. After all, in addition to fighting for love, the lawyers in the TV series are fighting for partner qualifications. If you proposed this plan when you just took over the firm, I would definitely agree, but it's not necessary now. Edmund sighed, it would be great if there was such a plan at the time. Looking at Rawls' puzzled expression, Edmund seemed to see Mason back then. Although the two fathers and sons had a bad relationship, they were both talented as lawyers, and they were also like curly-haired baboons in business. Same. After Mason passed away, although you took over the firm, other firms poached people, and many barristers and solicitors in our firm were shaken. In order not to let them leave, I not only gave them a salary increase, but also promised them that you won't interfere with the day-to-day work of the firm, as it did with Mason. Edmund waved the paper in his hand and sighed, now, the weekly salary of senior solicitors in our firm has reached £4, and the annual income is almost £400, and the annual income of most barristers has also reached £4. Around £1,200 is already the highest treatment that Backlund law firm can offer. Then I had to be able to figure it out. Rawls was helpless and continued to ask, isn't it better? Our firm will attract more barristers and solicitors. Then it depends on what you think. Edmund put down the piece of paper. If you want to be a lawyer like your father, you can naturally do so. My father. The relationship between the predecessor and his father was very bad, and they could quarrel with a few words, and the two never talked about the law firm. On the contrary, Edmund often talked to him about the interesting cases handled by the firm, so even if he had a bad relationship with his father, his predecessor also embarked on the road of being a lawyer. Well. Edmund let out a long sigh of relief, leaning on the sofa, as if caught in a memory. That was the 5th year we founded the firm, everything was on track, and the firm just had to run slowly without worrying about it. And Mason got married, and your mother was pregnant with you, for your sake. He's going to be a judge in the High Court. In ruin, all judges, except part-time magistrates, must be appointed from lawyers from the Big Four law schools. Among them, a judge of a district court must have at least 7 years of experience as a trial lawyer, a judge of a high court must have more than 10 years of experience as a trial lawyer, or more than 2 years of experience as a district court judge. An appeal court judge must have 15+ years experience as a barrister or 2+ years as a high court judge. At that time, Mason Adrian had more than 15 years of experience as a trial lawyer, and was a well-known barrister in Beckland. The nomination of a judge to the Court of Appeal may have to wait, but the nomination of a high court judge is relatively easy. Your father was nominated, but your mother died after giving birth to you. So instead of becoming a judge, Mason continued to be a lawyer, choosing to fill his life with endless cases. Not good, plus some emotional breakdowns because of your mother's death, and taking over so many cases, so you left so young. Edmund's eyes were a little wet and his nose was red. For him, Mason was not just a friend, but also saved him from the fate of a teacher of etiquette, and his brother who inherited the Baron. But he died early because of his addiction to alcohol. I think my father should be happy. He and his mother will definitely get eternal peace in the goddess's kingdom. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. Rawls can only say that the relationship between his predecessor and his father was weak. He had no impression of his mother, and when he came to him, he was even more superficial. He only hoped that the goddess of the night, who was also a traveler, would take good care of his parents. Edmund took out his handkerchief, wiped the corners of his eyes, looked at Rawls and asked, "How long has it been since you went to St. Samuel's Church to pray?" It's been about a month since I attended the moon mass last month." Rawls froze immediately. After he crossed over, he was frightened by the patronage, and then he was busy testing his abilities, so he didn't have time to go to church to pray. What's more, as a traveler, let alone going to St. Samuel's Cathedral in the North District, the goddess of the night, who has the title of Mother of Hidden, or going to the Magistrates' Court in Chawood District today, they all go around the holy wind. As he walked away from the church, for fear of getting too close, the Lord of the Storm found that he couldn't suppress those disrespectful words in his mind and gave himself a blow. Edmund is a follower of the Lord of the Storm, so he couldn't persuade Rawls to go to St. Samuel's Church. He bluntly returned to the topic, "Are you going to be a lawyer or a judge in the future?" I haven't thought about it, Uncle Robert. If there is no doomsday, and the predecessor is not involved in the extraordinary world, Rawls naturally wants to be a lawyer for more than 10 years in peace, and then nominate a judge to live his life smoothly. But when the end came, and he was already an extraordinary, he didn't know what secrets he had. How could he live such a life? Edmund nodded and said, "Yes, you've only been a lawyer for 2 years. But you have to think about it early. After all, it is related to the future development of the Adrian family." Rawls lowered his head and responded silently. "As for this partnership plan, let's wait for a while. Otherwise, Adrian law firm will become the target of many arrows, as Emperor Roselle said, which will be detrimental to future development. But if you're going to be a judge, or something happens to the firm, this plan can come in handy. Huang Tao, why do you exist everywhere? No wonder Klein complains about you so much. You have installed all the XS that can be installed by the traveler, so what should people do later?" "Okay." Rawls can only agree. It seems that this plan can only be implemented after he officially enters the world of Beyonders and is unable to manage the office anymore. However, it seems that he has never managed an office before. Okay, that's it for today. Edmund picked up the walnut cane leaning against the wall, stood up and walked towards the door. "I'll see you off." Rawls got up quickly, and with such an old gentleman and elders, he was not at ease for a moment. "No need." Edmund walked to the door, turned around and said, "Remember to interact with other law firms during your break, and get along well with the barristers in your own firm. You can't do everything. Let me, a 60-year-old old man, handle it for you." "Okay, okay." What else could Rawls say? Can only nod yes. "Also, attend more balls, banquets, salons, and the Adrian family wants you to pass on it." Edmund looked at Rawls with a smirk, paused his cane, and said angrily, "I'm leaving." "You go back." Rawls could only watch Edmund leave, and if he continued, he didn't know what Edmund would say. Rawls hired a twow-heeled buggy nearby and returned to his residence on Gatton Street in the West End. It was a two-story garden villa with more than a dozen rooms, with stables and servants' quarters. Perhaps it was because he had been renting a floor to sleep in his early years, which made Mason have a deep desire for a house, and he only bought a house instead of renting it. Even if Rawls rebelled and went to Tingen to go to school, where he studied for up to 7 years, Mason bought a small villa worth about £1,500 in Tingen. Since Rawls returned to Tingen, the small villa has been rented out like the other 2 properties of Adrian's family in Backlund. After deducting the amount of tax to be paid, the 3 properties can have an income of about £800 a year. The price of the garden villa that Rawls currently lives in is about £7,000, but so far, only Rawls lives here alone in this luxury villa. After Mason's death, the predecessor dismissed the housekeeper and servants and returned to Tingen to spend half a year completing his studies. After returning to Backlund, he was even more focused on work, and he even spent most of the time resting in the office's lounge, and just hired people to clean the villa on a regular basis. Rawls did not re-employ his servants. He had too many secrets on his body, and he was an extraordinary. The existence of the law of aggregation of extraordinary characteristics could attract extraordinary people of similar paths to approach at any time. Here again is the junction of the rich and noble districts of Backlund, and the beyonders of the arbiter pathway can be said to be grabbing a lot here. In case, like the return of Mr. K, he hired a group of servants with various problems. He is not like Klein. He is a cat raised by the goddess of the night, and he has a source castle, and he might be instantly cold. Cool. Rawls guessed that Mason lived here to better collect intelligence. There are a large number of rich people living in the West District, and Queens, which is more preferred by the nobles, is only 1 street away from here, passing the Williams next door. Street, it's Queens. After all, the housing prices here are too high, and Mason's identity is not very suitable here. However, Mason has been able to live here for nearly 30 years, and his identity is estimated to have been verified by the Night Watchers team in the West District, but I don't know whether it was Viscount Fearbird Mustang who helped cover up the past, or whether it was Mason himself. Ability to hide the past. In the original book, Raft Pound, a descendant of the Tudor family, was able to deceive Klein's psychic and hypnotism from the Baron. Although Klein was only a sequence 8 clown at that time, he was still a fortune-teller sequence after all. If Klein hadn't left his hand at the end, the big killer of the Source Castle would have been completely concealed. Mason is a lawyer. He is best at finding loopholes in language and telling the truth while avoiding the important ones. Every word a lawyer says is true, but it does not mean that lawyers are telling the truth. It is what lawyers can do to pile up lies with the truth. With a squeak, Rawls opened a utility room in the villa. There was an underground storage room that was once abandoned. When the predecessor discovered it, it became the predecessor's secret room. Cough, cough. Rawls coughed for a while. The predecessor of this secret room had not been opened for nearly a year. In addition, it was not ventilated, so the air in the secret room was hardly circulated. After waiting for a few minutes, Rawls felt that he was almost done, and then walked into the secret room. "Turn on the gas light," and the warm yellow light instantly casts over the long underground stairs. Yu reading www.yuuganshu.com illuminates the dark underground chamber. This secret room is not very big. There is only one oak bookcase against one side of the wall, and next to the bookshelf is a dark red desk, on which several books are piled messily. The table, the books, and the glass of the bookcase were covered with dust. It seems that there is no way to study today. Rawls sighed, but there was a burst of ecstasy in his heart. After all, any study is a matter of mind. What's more, because his predecessor didn't study these things seriously, he couldn't take shortcuts and could only relearn them by himself. No, when did I have such an idea? Rawls frowned. This is not what his character can think. If it is other things that are not very important, I may delay a few days in my previous life, but it will never be too long. But as long as it is an important thing, I will never delay it, not to mention that it is related to my life. Thing. And at noon, when I was thinking about the plan for a period of time in the future, it was the same. I thought that I would not be outdated in the future, so I lay down on the sofa for a few hours with peace of mind. If Uncle Robert came over, I am afraid I would still be in the office. Lie down. Is it because of the influence of the potion? But the predecessor and I have almost digested the potion, and it is only a suitable opportunity to be promoted to sequence 8. Or is it the influence of transmigration? But I don't feel anything wrong with me. It's a pity that lawyers don't have the ability to see, and can only perceive each other's emotions from their expressions. Could it be the reason why my predecessor lost control or the reason why I traveled through? How long has it been since you came here? A man's voice suddenly appeared. Rawls turned his head and looked in horror at the entrance to the secret room above the stairs. Who is it? Who is it? Although this secret room is not big, it is hidden deep underground. The stairs leading to the secret room are quite steep, so Rawls looked up the stairs and looked at the entrance of the secret room, and only saw the position below the knee of the person who came. He was wearing a pair of black leather boots and dark trousers, and the rest disappeared into Rawls' blind spot. You can't even hear my voice. It was a middle-aged man's voice, full of majesty, which made Rawls feel the urge to surrender. Majesty? Rawls' pupil shrank, and he remembered that it was the voice of Viscount Dreadbird Mustang. That big pirate with a bounty of more than 10,000 pounds. The powerhouse of Sequence 5. He has returned to Backlund. Sir, you're back. Rawls tried his best to control himself to keep his voice from trembling. How could it be so sudden? He appeared just after he threw out the task given by Viscount Fear in his mind. Are you here to urge me to complete the task? But he has no clue about that mission. Will he punish himself? Correct. There is a description of that ironclad in the original book. It is 101 meters long and 21 meters wide, with 4 main guns, and the speed can reach 16 knots. What if he asked me where the information came from? Heard it from a judge at the royal court? No, I can feel that Johnson is lying. The Fear Viscount sequence is higher than me, so I can definitely feel that I am lying. What are you thinking? Am I scary? Bird Mustang's voice sounded again. It's nothing, sir. Are you here for that ironclad ship? Rawls wanted to punch himself, so why did he say it? Are you a curly baboon? It's okay if you don't say it, it's definitely over when you say it. Suddenly, Rawls felt his tense nerves relax, and the surrounding air seemed to flow. Rawls looked around and found that it was not his own illusion. In the secret room, small cyclones appeared out of nowhere and rolled up the dust. The dust gathered together was the size of a fist, and slowly floated out of the secret room along the steep stairs. Bird Mustang began to descend the stairs. He was not wearing the Inta-style shirt with intricate cuffs and necklines, nor a dark red captain's suit, as described in the reward order. It is the same as most gentlemen in Backlund, wearing a white shirt and vest, wearing a black formal suit, and wearing a top hat. The only difference is the bronze skin, which is the mark of the perennial life at sea. Because the secret room was small and the stairs were steep, Rawls had to bow his head and even bent down when he came down to go down smoothly. Rawls is nearly 1.8 meters tall, and Bird Mustang is about his height, but he also wears a top hat. But he neither bowed his head nor bent down, and walked straight down the stairs, as if the distance between the ceiling of the secret room and the stairs was enlarged out of thin air. It is the distortion, the ability of the lawyer pathway sequence 6 corrupted Baron. Bird Mustang distorted the distance between the stairs and the ceiling of the secret room. While Rawls was thinking about this, Bird Mustang suddenly came to Rawls, and he distorted the distance between the two. Bird Mustang didn't mention anything about the ironclad. He glanced at the entire secret room, and suddenly said, "I thought you and your father chose not to continue on the extraordinary path, and sealed this secret room. But why did you open it again today? My father also knows about this secret room." Rawls did not answer the question of fear Viscount, but seized the loophole in his words to ask questions. This is the basic code of conduct for lawyers and must always be mastered. Initiative. However, he was also curious about the secret of this secret room. In his predecessor's memory, this secret room should only be known to him. Bird Mustang didn't care about this, glanced at Rawls, and replied, "This secret room was built by your father, but he chose to be a lawyer with peace of mind instead of continuing, so he sealed this room." Chamber of Secrets. Then why? Bird Mustang interrupted Rawls's further questioning, patted Rawls's shoulder, and said, "Okay, kid. Don't play with lawyers in front of me. You're still far behind." Rawls sneered, "Sorry, sir, I'm used to it." "You can't do this, remember the true meaning of acting. You're just acting as a lawyer, don't indulge in it. That's how your father was, so he couldn't digest the potion for a long time." Bird Mustang sighed, looking a little sad. "My father?" Rawls continued to ask, and now he just wanted to skip the ironclad thing completely. "Enough. Answer my question. Why did you open this secret room again today?" Rawls only felt that Bird Mustang's figure suddenly grew taller, and the lights in the secret room suddenly dimmed, and the air seemed to flow still and flow again. This is the ability of the Sequence 5 Chaotic Mentor, which comes from the majesty of the Mentor. Rawls chose to stop testing Bird Mustang, but from the test of the Fear Viscount, his previous guess was indeed correct. Bird Mustang and his father Mason Adrian's relationship is truly extraordinary. In order to become a more powerful Beyonder, although he was limited by the majesty of the Viscount of Fear, he answered his question, but only partially answered it. After all, to become stronger was also one of his reasons for coming to the secret room. Because of what? Bird Mustang frowned. Although he had only been with Rawls for a week on the surface, he had been paying attention to Rawls for a long time in secret. He knows very well what kind of person Rawls is. Although he has a good life, he is not like those ignorant noble children who are curious about the extraordinary world. The influence of lawyers' family makes Rawls very rational. UU reading www.uugonshu.com. The world is always cautious. When he chose to take the magic potion to become an extraordinary, most of it was because of the persecution of the big pirate. Therefore, when he was teaching Rawls's occult knowledge, Rawls only paid attention to the acting method of life-saving, and only had to understand other mysterious knowledge. Rawls replied without pause, "I'm tired. Really tired." Although he has only been a lawyer for half a month, the files and precedents of dozens of centimeters really make him, a lawyer, a little white, overwhelmed. The legal judgment of the Lone Kingdom does not rely on written law, but on case law. Judges rely on previous cases to punish when sentencing, which makes Lone Kingdom's lawyers need to collect the same cases when dealing with cases. The case sets composed of these cases are often tens of centimeters thick, and even some cases are more than 1 meter high. Barristers will find the lightest sentence from the set of precedents for their clients, and this also allows judges to punish without worrying about the influence of public opinion. After all, there are precedents to follow. Bird Mustang nodded to indicate that he understood. After all, he was only a young man in his early 20s. How could he be rational? Rawls was not born in poverty like Mason, and he was able to persist for 2 years from a well-to-do life, which was the greatest comfort to Mason's efforts. He is also a lawyer, and he understands the virtues of his former colleagues. But that's fine, so he doesn't have to hide anything about Mason from Rawls. Bird Mustang used a sapphire ring on his finger with the characteristics of wind blessed to create a whirlwind to close the door of the secret room, distorting the concept of closing the door and turning it into a seal. The secret room, isolated from inside and outside. Rawls, what I'm going to say next concerns your father, don't interrupt me, don't ask questions, just listen to me first. Bird Mustang was actually very helpless. The little guy who was still cautious in front of him back then dared to play tricks on him that he had played before. But I also understand that Rawls is someone who has a firm foothold in Backlund's legal circle after all. With more knowledge, he can vaguely guess that his relationship with him is unusual. And Rawls was startled. When Bird Mustang distorted the concept of closing the door into a seal just now, he thought he felt that there was a problem with his answer. He nodded quickly, signaling that he would not interrupt him. Seeing Rawls finally nodding, Bird Mustang breathed a sigh of relief. He is now afraid that this ignorant guy will trick the lawyer again. It was fine in front of him, but if he was found in front of other Beyonders, Rawls, as a lawyer, would not end well. The innate intimacy of lawyers and the ability to find loopholes made them not well known among Beyonders. I guess you can guess that my relationship with your father is not as simple as I told you before, otherwise you wouldn't be so presumptuous. Rawls smiled shyly and made a zipper motion in front of his mouth. Bird Mustang glared at Rawls and continued, Mason and I have known each other for nearly 50 years. When we were teenagers, we moved goods together in the dock area of Backlund, and there were about 15 souls a week. Salary. If we keep doing this, we might be able to marry a daughter of the same poor family before the age of 30, have a child who will grow up to be like us, and then live to be in our 40s and die in pain. At that time, every day I came back from the dock, I wanted to lie down on the floor that I rented. Mason was different. He also went to the free school run by the Church of the Evernight Goddess. I would help him carry more goods during the day, and then when he was free teach me to read. We've been like this for 3 or 4 years, but life hasn't gotten any better. But when I thought we'd go on like this, your father met my captain, Earl Baifeng. Earl Baifeng is the owner of the Dark Emperor and the King of the Five Seas Nast. His title is inherited from his father, Savannah Solomon, who is also a great pirate, and this title is Emperor Roselle given. Rawls thought that Bird Mustang and Mason first obtained the lawyer potion, and then one chose to become a pirate, and the other chose to become a lawyer, but they never expected that they would meet 5 when they were still ordinary people. The King of the Sea, or Nast, whom his father met first. At that time, the Earl secretly sneaked into Backlund. Originally, with the Earl's strength, he still sneaked in secretly and would not be discovered at all. But what I didn't expect was that the Sea King Ion Courtman of the Church of the Storm discovered the Earl. The 3 major churches they chased the Earl with the high-level powerhouses of the lone royal family. Although they were distracted by the Earl's friends, the Earl was seriously injured. Because the entire Backlund was also sealed off by the 3 major churches, the Earl had to hide first. According to Rose, the darkest place is under the lamp, as the great emperor said, hiding near St. Samuel's Cathedral. When was Nast still so miserable? By the way, Zhongxiu in the original book once said that Nast was almost arrested in Backlund, which should be this time. But was Jan Kottman in Backlund at that time? Could it be because he didn't catch Nast this time, so he applied to be transferred to the Rosset Sea area? So now the Archbishop of Holy Wind Church has become the dove of God Ace Snake? However, Nast is worthy of being the king of the 5 seas. The archbishops of the 3 major churches in Backlund are basically saints, plus the powerhouses and sealed items of the lone royal family, let alone a luxurious lineup of 5 saints, so they can escape. Nast's friend? Didn't you mention it in the original book? Could it be that he was killed by Nast this time? Could it be Bernadette? If Huang Baibei, together with the sealed artifact left by Roselle, would be able to deal with the luxurious lineup of the 5 saints. What kind of brain does Nast have? Where to hide? Hiding near St. Samuel's Cathedral? Even if the lights are dark, you have to hide near the Holy Wind Cathedral, right? Doesn't he know that there is Mother of Hidden in the title of the goddess? And she's still the queen of adversity and fear, isn't she afraid of a curse from the goddess? Rawls lowered his head, for fear that he would laugh. He kept complaining about Nast in his heart, hiding near the church of the goddess. Viscount Fearbird Mustang saw Rawls lowered his head, thought he was shocked by his own words, and nodded in satisfaction. In his opinion, Rawls must be made aware of the horror of the extraordinary world, and reading www.yuyugonshu.com let him return to the time when he was rational before. At that time, the Earl changed his appearance and attire, and Mason and I had already taken the lawyer potion, so that they escaped the search of the 3 major churches and the lone royal family. After the Earl was injured, let me and Mason the choice is whether to follow him back to the Dark Emperor, or give us a sum of money to live in Backlund. Rawls raised his head and asked, "Did my father choose to live in Backlund?" "Yes. Your father doesn't want to be a pirate, he wants to live a stable life, and I can't." Bird Mustang raised his palms in front of him, then clenched his fists. "I can't. I'm fed up with living like that, I'd rather be a pirate." He actually knew in his heart that even if he didn't meet the King of the 5 Seas, he wouldn't be able to hold on for long, and Nast's appearance just gave him a better excuse. Then, Mason and I separated. Bird Mustang lowered his head, sighed deeply, and sat on the chair in front of the desk. It wasn't until Mason became famous in the Backlund legal world and founded the Adrian law firm that I heard about him again. I wanted to return to Backlund to see Mason, but I had just become a Sequence 7 briber at that time. The spirit is not stable, and he is burdened with a bounty, it is impossible to go back. By the time I got back, Mason was married and your mother had you. Everything was normal, except your father. Your father didn't know the playing method, and he was a lawyer for too long, and he was always bewitched. Under the influence of the medicine, the spirit is not very stable, but he always thought that it was caused by excessive work pressure. But after more than 10 years, and you are about to be born, the spirit has finally stabilized.